Hello and welcome to another episode of the CG Garage. This is episode number 382 featuring the amazing Scott Kirvan. Yes, Scott Kirvan, some of you may know, he was one of the founders of Splutterfish, the makers of Brazil. And this is, if you guys have been following the renderers in the last 20, 30 years, you know that Brazil was a very, very interesting and a powerful ray tracer that came out around the same time that V-Ray did. So it was definitely one of the competitors to that area. But Scott and Steve also were super nice guys. I really liked them. I've been in touch with Scott for years, and it was great catching up with him and just to talk about, his experiences. Since those days, he's done a lot of different things and has gone on a lot of different adventures and made a lot of, shall we say, adjustments or in his career or things that he's wanted to do or pivots. But it's great. And he's back doing visual effects these days and really getting into virtual production and a bunch of other things as well. So it was really cool chatting with him. Kristen, what did you think of Scott?
Yeah, well, I call him like a jack of all trades. He's done everything. He just came back from being on set for a while where, he explains he just thrives. He loves being on it. But like he's gone from like Blur to brewing beer and then more VFX soup work. And then, as you said, wrote one of the original Max ray tracers. So it is an incredible story and very interesting, very tech focused podcast. So Yeah.
Actually, before V-Ray and before any of that stuff, there was the capability of doing ray tracing that happened inside of Max, and it wasn't a full ray tracer, but that was something that was written by Scott over at Blur. So it was really cool. Sort of like this guy, got a lot of stuff. Really nice guy, super generous with his time and super kind. And I've always enjoyed his company. So really great chatting with him. Okay, we've got a couple of announcements. Kristen, what's going on? We've got something happening on July 15th. What's going on?
Yeah, so you can find this out at chaos.com/events, but Chaos will be hosting a special live stream on Billy, I have to say it right, to learn what's new in V-Ray 6 for 3ds Max and how to apply it in your workflow. So again, go to chaos.com/events and you can sign up for that online.
Perfect. And if you guys are curious about V-Ray 6 for 3ds Max, it is still in beta, but not for long. So if you want to hop onto the beta, you better do it soon and check it out. But V-Ray 6 has got a lot of cool stuff. It's got a new cloud system, new geometry patterns, new scatter tools, new V-Ray NMesh, decals with displacement, a new proxy hierarchy, so many new things that are happening. So it would be great to get your feedback on those as a beta. But if you want to, even if you want to just check it out as a beta and see what those new features are like, you better do it fairly soon because it will be going out of beta not long from now. All right. But if people want to know more about the podcast, where should they go, Kristen?
You can go to facebook.com/CG Garage Podcast or chaos.com/CG Garage. And if you'd like to watch us, go to youtube.com/Chaos Group TV.
Perfect. And if you have any ideas of other podcasts or would like to have questions about this one or just give us a comment in general, you can always email us. It's labs@chaos.com. But for now, enjoy episode number 382 with Scott Kirvan.
Welcome to another CG Garage where the Chaos Group talks. You'll know it's over when the last bucket drops. We're gonna fire off rays in high dynamic range. We know that ambient occlusion is passé. Global illumination won't lead you astray. And while image-based lighting is really swell, you need to make sure everything has Fresnel.
You and I have met many, many times, but it's been a long time since we've connected. And I think one of the times I remember meeting you, believe it or not, was at a soft homage party. It was in Santa Monica, and it was you, me, and Joe Alter were chatting outside.
Yeah.
And I think I was talking to you about rendering because obviously, I was really into rendering at the time. I still am. But I was talking to Joe and he said, yeah, I'm making this new plugin called Shave and a Haircut. And I said, you know what you should do is you should make a grass plugin for architects. And you said, listen to him, Joe. Like architects, there's a lot of money in architecture and rendering. I just sort of remember I was like, you see, Scott gets it. So it was kind of interesting. So I want to know a little bit from your perspective, like how did you get into CG? Like what was the sort of that got you into all of this stuff?
It started a long time ago. I mean, I was probably 12 or 13. And I got access to, no, man, it started like when I was 11. A buddy of mine, my mentor, taught me guitars, electronics. We just did all kinds of really interesting stuff together. And I was a kid. I had a crush on his daughter, so I ended up hanging out at their house a lot. She wanted nothing to do with me, but he was very cool.
Right.
So he got like a Sinclair ZX81 at one point. It was like a sort of a Heathkit thing that you solder together, right? So he bought the kit.
That was my first computer.
Yeah, and that was how I learned to program. Was with it had this membrane keyboard that had modes that you could program it with. No way to save anything I wrote except for writing it down on paper, right? So I wrote all my programs down on paper, and I would actually start it out. Because it was so slow and such a pain to use, I actually would plan and write programs on paper and then try them on the computer. I ended up writing some video games, right? These little games that you set them up, and they were kind of like Depth Charge was one. I was copying arcade games, right? And there was a skiing thing. And basically, all the games ran, and you'd watch your score and see how good a score you could get until the RAM filled up and the game crashed. And that was how the games all played. But I went from that, so those are graphics based. And I'm like, that's really cool. And then we upgraded to an Apple II, and I wrote a paint program. This was there was no mouse available or anything like that. You used the keyboard to skirt a little cursor around the screen. And I had keystrokes for just changing the color of a pixel or drawing a box or a circle, and it was actually you could push it pretty far. It was pretty funny, and then you could even save the images and stuff like that. I ended up taking finally getting into computer classes in high school, and I was able to sort of opt out of the computer classes and go do independent study because I walked in on day one and just showed the instructor what I was already doing, and he's like, "Yeah, you're gonna be a little bit bored, so why don't you go to the library and just do whatever you want?" So that's where it started. I've always been really visual, photography, painting, drawing, things like that. Got into college and ran across I think it was a SIGGRAPH's proceedings in the library, and I was like, "Holy shit, this is amazing! Jello dynamics, what's that?" Right? Things like that, and I just got super excited about it, and tried to get into it at that point. Tried to get into computer graphics in the business, but it was in Minneapolis. It was a pretty tough thing to do. There was there's these commercial artist guys, and I think SGI was actually based there. I think I called SGI and it was like, "Hey, is there anything I can do?" And they're like, "Well, go to college," right? That sort of thing. So it was like, but even all computer science had nothing interest in it. So I actually ended up becoming an electrical engineer. And it was after graduation that I kind of always just kept doing graphics as sort of a side thing along with all the engineering work. So I was always plotting things and stuff like that. And that got me into some, I got hired as a graphics guy for a biomedical company that did sleep disorder diagnostics. That was so boring. Did that for about a year. And then I ended up finding out that there was a company that was doing computer graphics in Minneapolis, and it was on the Amiga, and it was Impulse. They had a program called Imagine 3D, and I started working with them. So that's kind of, I guess, that's where it started, because that's where it really jumped from really rudimentary, simple, turning pixels on and off to actually doing stuff that was more rendering based and using real color gradients and visual fidelity and things like that. And that's also where I started to meet
Okay.
a lot of people that were doing this stuff, and made some lifetime friendships through like AOL and things like that, and got me into the business.
Okay.
Friendships through that got me a job after Impulse. I ended up out at Blur Studio in Venice Beach.
So you moved from Minneapolis to Venice?
Yeah. I was employee number 11 at Blur. I was actually just on a road trip
Okay.
with a buddy, and one of these friends I had made through AOL worked at Blur Studio. I knew nothing about Blur, but we were traveling and road tripping through California, and I was like, hey, can I stop in and see what you do? And he brought me in, introduced me to everybody, showed me where my desk was going to be, things like that. So 2 weeks later, I was actually at Blur Studio, and I was hired on as an effects programmer, right? Writing
Okay.
things like fire and textures and things like this. Had never touched 3ds Max prior to that, and they were a 3D Studio Max house.
Right.
So I started programming that, and then from there, got into more and more rendering software, spun that off into, we wrote a renderer called Brazil. At the time was the Brazil rendering system. It was a ray tracing, production quality ray tracing, global illumination renderer. And we spun that off into a separate company. Blur let us do that. Me and my buddy, Steve Blackman, we did that.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Did that for 8 years, maybe probably a little bit more than 8 years, to be honest. And then it got acquired, and that didn't last very long. So, very bad experience, burned me out pretty bad. I took a giant left turn and opened a brewery. So I've been in the brewery business for the last 10 years, and just getting back into film work and stuff. I've always loved filmmaking and film work, and throughout, like, Blur was awesome because they let us sort of moonlight and work with other studios. So I got to work on a wide variety of the filmmaking stuff, and as well as like visual effects work. And it was kind of, once Splatterfish started and we were doing the Brazil renderer, then I stayed in that. Pardon my allergies; they're really bad.
That's okay.
I was able to sort of continue to dabble in the film business, and then it eventually got to the point where, like, Splatterfish was taking up way too much of my time. Film work was no longer really an option, and I moved to Seattle and sort of fell out of the business, and that's when we were acquired, and I opened that brewery. But over the
Right.
last, probably 10 years, 5 years if you take COVID out of it, but over the last 10 years or so, I've kind of gotten slowly back into a little bit more of the filmmaking side of things. Not a lot of visual effects work or large productions being done in the Seattle area, so it's been a lot of independent films, a little bit of acting and stuff like that. But
Wow.
and in the last, just coming out of COVID, I got really interested in, actually just before COVID, I got really interested in what's been going on with GPU, real-time processing, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Just really sucked my teeth into Unreal Engine. Really loving it. Excuse me. And I've been getting back into visual effects supervision. So now I've a little over a year ago. No, not even that long. It was I did a GMC commercial that I was able to visual effects supervise on. It's the first thing I'd done like that in the longest time. It was local, up on one of the mountains out here. It was great. And then a friend of mine back from the Venice era, Todd Perry, called me up, and he needed a partner on a visual effects job he was taking, and it was technical supervision. It was all forced perspective in camera work, so there was a lot of mathematics involved, and it was a lot of on the fly stuff. And he got me on that job, and I was literally in New Orleans for 5 months working on that show. It's a show for Amazon. We can talk about it more if you like.
Okay. Yeah.
And I ended up, and then another couple weeks in the Bay Area in California, and just wrapped that. I've only been home for about a week now, so
Okay.
that's the apologies.
Yeah, I know, because we kept trying to schedule this podcast and it had to be around that schedule. But
Yeah.
now listen, I don't want to, I know you went, you kind of went through the Reader's Digest version of your career, because there's some important parts that I want people to know more, more about it. But I mean, like, correct me if I'm wrong, because the rumor on the street is that either you or I mean, one of you guys wrote one of the original Max ray tracers that got put into Max. Is that correct?
Yeah, that was us. We sort of the big idea back.
This is before Max had I mean, it was all scanline, and they needed a little bit of ray tracing.
Yeah,
It's kind of what they needed.
Some of that stuff in the studio, we were just hitting walls with just simple reflections and things like that, and
yeah,
we were digging into the shader API inside 3ds Max and inside the scanline renderer, and the way it worked was you would, as a shader, you get this. The renderer says, "Hey, I've got this point in space. It's attached to this object. What color is it?" Right, and then the shader goes and it's got its pile of data that you give it. It could just be that you typed in, set it to red, right? So it could return red, a color that the renderer is looking for. And we were like, what if we said, when the renderer asked the shader what color it was, the shader said, "Hang on a second, I'm going to go find that out." And it shot a ray into the scene and returned what it saw. And it was like, when that idea popped into our heads, I bet it was within an hour or two of hacking around, we had basically silhouettes of other objects that we were seeing in reflections. And it's like, holy crap, this is going to work if we can get enough information. And we actually worked a little bit with the Yoast group, who were the programmers behind 3 Studio Max, and to find out where the information was available that we needed, because it was in there, or else I think there was maybe like one API that they had to add for us so we could get a little bit more information. But I think that came later, when we were really trying to do something a little bit richer with it. And yeah, it ended up being it was pretty funny, because you'd hit render, right? The scanline render would be like then it would hit like something that had the ray trace material or texture on it, and it would like stop. And all of a sudden this dialogue pop up and start like doing all this shit, calculating all this stuff and collecting the entire scene into basically spawned off a separate renderer. And then once that was done, it would just clock right along through that, and it was pretty cool. It was a pretty neat idea, the way it worked. And I'm seeing it done a lot more now in a lot of other stuff. It's because scanline rendering is so efficient and so fast, and that's really what all the GPUs are doing. And now you can hybridize those the same way we did the scanline render in 3ds Max, and so you're getting this like super performant but really great visual fidelity out of these things, which is what got me back interested into CG, because I mean, like I said, I was pretty burned out on the whole tech side of the world.
Right.
I
mean, that was an interesting time. I mean, to me, it was the revolutionary time of ray tracing in terms of that, so it was V-Ray and Brazil and Final Render were like the big 3 that everyone was interested in doing.
Yeah.
And, what was interesting to me was, because you guys came from Blur and you knew how artists worked, because you guys were literally embedded into Blur, you developed interfaces and ways of actually interacting with the renderer that just made sense.
Yeah, there are things like, since Brazil's gone, and I've tried pulling up other renderers in recent history now, and it's like, oh, I miss those tools. It was just so much smoother to work with in Brazil. Yeah. It's also what I knew and what I was comfortable with, but I find it very difficult to do other renderers.
Well, I mean, what was it like? I mean, it was probably, you mentioned it was a really hard time during some of the things, but what was it like being part of that that part of the ray tracing sort of revolution that was going on at that time?
Well, it was awesome. There was a lot of things we were doing that were pretty unique. We based our business structure on the same thing the Yoast Group was doing. So we didn't have offices, right? So we were one of the first sort of virtual companies out there. The internet was really just starting. It was making that switch from, it was just a bunch of pages that you went and visited, and it was like business cards laying out there and portfolios. It was making that switch to where it became more of a social interactive thing. So we had forums and chat rooms and all this stuff that we were all throwing together. So it became this, like, Brazil and Splutterfish became more than just this render. It became this entire community. And it's really, it was a really neat time to be doing that. And we ended up, because of what we were doing, worldwide attention. Our manual was translated into. Somebody sent me a Japanese version of our manual, and I think I saw some Russian stuff too. Even though we didn't sell much into Russia even back then.
Right.
They were more hassle to deal with than anything else. But
yeah, I do remember. That one thing that was very big memory to me. I was working on Day After Tomorrow, I believe, and they were trying to do. They were working on they were setting up a DD. They were setting up to do Stealth as a film, and they were trying to get these CG airplanes to look very photoreal, and they were using RenderMan at the time, and they had a slew of TDs working on RenderMan shaders to try to make this thing look CG, and it just wasn't quite right. And then someone saw on the internet, I actually think it was Rob Niederhorst. He saw a short clip that some guy did, Rune Spawn. I think you remember him. And he did a little jet that's flying around in Brazil. And it just.
Yeah.
Do you remember that?
Yeah.
And it was perfect. And they're like, he did it, and you can imagine, and like people who are all at that time, Maya and RenderMan's like, this guy did it in Max by himself. And he didn't use any custom shaders at all. Like, how is he just showing us off like this? And so it was a really like a big thing, is like how this is going to work and how this is going to be. So I remember, specifically that ray tracing revolution was a big deal. It's like suddenly like you don't need an army of TDs to make something look realistic. You basically needed good math.
We really felt like we were doing something that was really important, because we were taking what was my experience as a kid trying to do this stuff and just hitting a wall because I didn't have the money for the equipment that you needed to do this work. And we were just like, oh, you have a PC? Yeah. Okay. That's really the entry point now, is just, do you have a PC on your desktop? Which was just empowering the artists and really focusing on the artists and the problem solving was. It was a pretty neat time. I really felt like we were doing something important,
It was, and you guys were really cool to talk to. I know it was a very competitive time during that time, especially with different softwares, but you guys were always very cool to talk to, always very friendly, and I've always liked hanging out and chatting with you and Steve Blackman as well, because I think it was just, really, really great stuff, and it was fun. Now, you, from what I remember, like the Brazil render is kind of still alive in hardware. Is that true?
It's, it has changed so radically that I don't think it really is. Last I heard, I don't know I'm not spoiling anything by saying this, because nobody I've spoke with works for the companies, but so it's just a rumor again.
Okay.
But my understanding is that what was the original sort of core technology did make it into hardware rendering, right? That company got bought. The company that bought them got bought. The technology sort of existed in a limbo, and it's been developed and focused more and more. And I think it was relatively recently that Apple was talking about ray tracing, and the hardware that they're using is very likely to be based on some like offspring of that hardware. So it may
Right.
just be standard ray tracer inside of an Apple iPhone at some point. I don't know, but yeah, it's
Got it.
pretty much, yeah, it's, you can't like get the renderer and use it, anymore. Things like that.
Right.
Some people were still struggling trying to keep licenses working up until like 2016 and 2018, I think.
Oh, really?
There was still
Wow.
one license that was given out, and it's like, oh, guys.
Yeah, but I do remember like you guys were doing things like they were just from, I mean, you made an interface and icons inside of Macs that like, oh, no, that makes sense. Like it was just much better in a lot of ways to some of those things. I mean, it was really great. And of course, there was all kinds. I was obviously much more of a V-Ray person, but I've always had huge respect for what Brazil was doing and what it was about. So it was really cool.
Yeah, I sold a lot of V-Ray. We get people calling, like asking us, like looking at different rendering packages and
Mhm.
talking about what they wanted to do. And we'd be like, well, we're working on that part, but V-Ray does it right now. I would get V-Ray. And I said, can we do this later? And, we gained oddly enough, a lot of customer loyalty that way, because they're like, oh, I can really trust these guys,
Yeah.
Because I didn't,
That's great.
Even back then, it's about the image and it's about the job and it's about the artist. It's not about the render itself. I always wanted to work more together with the other renderer guys around, and I even talked to, had some good discussions with the V-Ray guys about it. Never really came to much, but it was sincere. It's stuff I wanted to do. The even the developers from Cebus were pretty open about that stuff, but it's kind of the leadership wasn't on board.
Right.
We'll say, Yeah.
Yeah. I told Vlado that I'm doing a podcast with you, and he is super excited. He's like, I want to know what he's up to. I was like, well, you'll find out. So, and I've had a couple. Marcus Fajaro has been on here, and so I've had a bunch of people in the render space.
Right on. Yeah.
I keep running into people that are like, I think I told the story. I was on Pismo Beach of all places, and my daughter ran into this person and chatted with this kid that was her age, and they became friends on the beach. And then I met this person's dad, and he was like, "Oh yeah, I used to be into computer graphics way back in the day. I wrote a renderer called Pavre." I was like, "What?" I was like, "No, that's the guy who wrote Pavre." Super nice guy. Okay, so all right, but you mentioned obviously it got really difficult and challenging, and I'm sure being an entrepreneur and some of the politics and acquisitions, you don't have to get into it if you don't want to, and I'm sure it's fine. But I want to get into this brewing thing a little bit. So you started getting into brewing beer. How did that start? Where did that passion come from? I love beer, so tell me about that.
That also happened in college. I don't think I was old enough to drink yet.
Okay.
But I was. So I'm super curious, right? I just want to know how everything works, right? It's just part of my nature. First principles guy, right? And I was actually, I played rugby for the longest time, but this was when I was starting out playing rugby. And one of my teammates, like after practice, he's like, "You guys want a beer?" I brought beer, and I was like, "Yeah, sure." And he opens up his trunk, and I'm like, "What kind of beer is this?" And he's like, "It's homebrew." And I'm like, well, "What the hell is homebrew?" It's like, it's beer you make at home. And I was like, "You can make beer?" So I was just like, "Well, you have to show me how to do this." And so he invited me over. We brewed a batch of beer. I was like, "This is amazing." I called up a buddy. I was like college poor. Called up a buddy and said, "Hey, it's going to cost, I want to make beer. It's going to cost this much to buy the equipment. Let's split it half and half, and we'll brew every week and split the beer." And started brewing at that point pretty much every week. Did that all through my time in Minneapolis and into California. And then when I moved to the Pacific Northwest, I got more equipment. I got more efficient at it. I was making better beers and just hanging out with friends. And they're like, "You should really open a brewery. This is good stuff." And I after I got out of caustic graphics, I was just kind of like floating. I didn't know where I was going to go. I was like, I should just do that, and I gave it a shot. Yeah, we just sold the brewery about a month ago, so we closed at the end of June here.
Okay.
So I'm getting out of the brewing business now.
Okay. But you did that for like at least a decade or two, right? No, a decade, right?
It's been 10 years. This is our 10th year. Yeah.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
But that was fun. It was a good distraction, it sounds like.
Yeah. It's cool. I still love it. I'm really just a nerd about beer and beer styles, and um yeah, just it's like
What's your favorite beers? What's your favorite beer type?
my favorite beer has been probably for probably for 20 years now is an English style IPA, which is
Okay.
is almost it's a maltier IPA. It's not super hoppy. It's not super hop forward. It's just more bitter. It's exactly what I have right here.
Okay.
It's we in the Pacific Northwest. It's so unlike an IPA here that we sell it at the brewery as a Northwest style amber, which means it's a slightly hoppy amber, and
Right.
yeah, that's really popular. Just super drinkable. Not incredibly strong, but a nice full flavor, and
Yeah.
yeah.
I find it fascinating that American beers that used to be just had the worst reputation in the world for being super crappy beers has completely turned around and recently, which is always it was always there, but it was just kind of very hidden. But now so many microbreweries are showing up in places that are making some of the best beers. That there's now places in Europe that are like trying to get American microbrews into them, even places like Belgium, which are really kind of have really great stuff. And I just find it amazing. I'm glad to hear about, I'm really curious to taste the beer that you have, because I am tired of the IPA craze a little bit in LA. Like you go to it's just ridiculous. But I do think it's really amazing. And I'm a huge fan of the barrel-aged stouts and barrel-aged beers as well, which I think are really good.
Yeah.
Did you guys make any of those as well?
Yep. Yeah, we've done. I think one of the best beers I've ever made was a barrel-aged Scotch ale, like a strong Scotch, and just with the combination of the super sweet, rich malty beer with that sort of bourbon hit in it, it just can't top it. I think it's just the best combo there.
Yeah, for sure. That's really, really good. Well, all right. Well, I'm going to have to, at some point when you come down to LA, you and I are going to have to do some good beer tasting at some point.
Well, yeah. Where you at?
I'm in Burbank, but I go to Culver City for work because that's where the job is. So
yeah. It's really likely I'll end up in LA periodically here. So
yeah. Okay. So how you take this big break from visual effects? How do you say like, I'm just going to get back into supervising? How did like, you just like call someone up and like, how does that work? I mean, that's a big transition.
No, it's a lot of past experience. It's not a lot of super in-depth experience. This show that I just got off of is the sort of the longest, like on from pre-production on set every day, that sort of a gig. That's the longest job I've ever done like that.
Okay.
It's a lot of networking. It's people who know me well enough to know what I'm like, my intelligence level, what I'm capable of, my eye.
Sure.
There, there's just sort of a bit of a known reputation, so that's helped a ton.
Right.
It was quite a while ago, so things have changed. They're very much the same, but it's kind of nice to get back into it, because I do feel like I'm because I've worked film. It's hard to find like guys who've actually worked with film that are coming into the industry with all this real time experience, right? So it's that I'm still like heavy into like what's the current tech, but I've also just still got a lot of this old school like understanding of how cameras and lenses and lights and basic in camera stuff works. So yeah,
Right.
I'm
I mean,
crossing.
besides,
Hope
I
you
mean,
ain't the same
obviously
way.
you're starting to interact a lot more with real time stuff, but what's been some of the bigger changes that you've noticed on set, especially from on set supervision? Like what's changed a lot more?
Uh, it could be just this production, but things move fast. There is a lot happening at once. Um, the the language is different. There's some slight. It's like there's some slight differences that I'm like, what did he mean when he said that? That sort of thing. And it's even the language around visual effects supervision, because as a, a, a effect supervisor in say 2000, um,
Hmm.
I would be a hired gun. I'd come in for maybe up to 3 weeks or 2 weeks on a job. But I I was my own producer. I was my own data wrangler. I was all that stuff. It seems like there's a lot better separation of those jobs now, um,
Hmm.
so that you've got the supervisor who kind of runs the entire project, and you've got the producer, which is a key part of that business and organizational end. And now you've got visual effect coordinator, visual effects editor that's involved, so that you're starting to look at shots before they get subbed out to vendors, and you're getting director sign off. There's a lot of things that we were doing at the tail end of my work in visual effects where we were starting to do more previs on set, where we had a computer there with an operator, an animator, right? Basically doing previs, and for any tweaks the director wanted to do, or if there was a camera change or something like that, well, we just rerun the previs. That
Hmm.
sort of stuff is. Um, I was doing basically tech viz for some of our in camera effects on the spot, where it was literally like the we know what the shot was going to be, but we never. We know it's going to be a visual effects shot. It's going to be a forced perspective shot, but it's not planned out in advance. The director and the DP like get on set, they see what they want to do, they find the shot, and then it's like, okay, now I got to do it real quick tech viz. So I open up Unreal. I've got some scripts written. I drop in some mannequins and a camera, and I set this thing all up super fast. It's all there. Everything that we need to see shows exactly how it has to be done. And I'm like immediately on the radio to the grips, telling them I need this and I need this and I need this, and we get this stuff built. And it's what we used to take, what I would assume would usually be like days of planning. Now we're doing, and it's only kind of slowing down that production, like maybe 5 to 10 minutes. It's an
Wow.
extra step in there, but it allows so much more flexibility. And it's that that 10 minutes includes actually bringing in all the extra materials that we need for platforms and rigging and things like that. It was super super fun. It was the neatest project I've ever worked on.
Yeah, that's cool. I mean, so I mean, obviously, Unreal has been a big game changer in a lot of that stuff for you guys and for what you're doing, and you're able to sort of use it as a literally real time filmmaking tool, right? In a lot of ways.
Yeah, yeah, and it wasn't planned that way. It just ended up being it. I mean, it's not like I was brought in to do that. It was just like, we could do this, and it will help me get this done. So there was just a lot of tools we were bringing in, and as we realized we needed more, the iPhone lidar scanning everything, so
Hmm.
we were just like super rapidly scanning, pulling things in, and using it as kind of this previs tech viz blocking real quick. Here's and then get the get the director, the DP over. It's like, how do you like this? Is this kind of what you think you want to do? You know, it's pretty cool. It's definitely that's a change. We weren't seeing that kind of stuff for.
Yeah. I think that's kind of awesome. I think it's really great that people are able to just sort of build it right away, then and there, and make it work and figure out everything you're needing. I mean, it's a blessing in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But I meant, yeah, I noticed, a lot of stuff you've been writing about, or I've seen that you're getting into. You're starting to get more into some virtual production work as well. Is that true? Are you starting to look at some of that? So, what are some of the things you're looking at in virtual production, and how are you using that to solve some of your problems?
I'm so by virtual production, I don't mean LED walls.
Neither do I.
Yeah, that's usually a kind of a misinterpretation there. So it's
Yep.
a lot of it is about using the tools as part of story development. I like that. I'm working with some. If we've got some friends, some local independent filmmakers, so we're kind of experimenting with some little ideas to be able to use this a little bit more as an independent tool. So, doing things where there's been a little bit of experimenting with some sort of interactive lighting, just using projectors instead of LED walls for the lighting itself. Also a little bit of motion capture, mostly just to capture camera information so that we can do a handheld camera on a green screen and be able to use that in a visual effects pipeline and to be able to what do they call it, simulcam, where you can see. We're doing a green screen shoot, but we can see what's actually happening and things like that. Yeah, simulcam's another thing that is definitely wasn't being done back in the early 2000s, where it's not broadly, and now it was something we were using on set pretty regularly just to help with eye lines and interaction when people weren't when the characters were not actually in the same space. If you can simulcam it, then they can still get the same action even if they're in two different rooms. The same interaction.
Right. Yeah, I've actually been very, very, very interested in virtual production for a long time, especially virtual cameras. Yeah, let's get more into real time. I think what are some of the things that you're looking forward to in real time, and thinking that's going to change some of the filmmaking process as we go?
Primarily the visual fidelity. I think we're getting closer and closer to. Well, I mean, it's already happening, but just getting final pixel directly off of things in real time. That's it's and the more adoption of these tools. Man, that's a weird question. I don't know why my brain's scrammed on it, but. I think it's that same sort of stuff we had with Brazil, where I felt like the artist was being empowered at a level that we'd never seen before, and that's what I'm smelling here. Is that that a lot of the creative blockers are getting out of the way, and one of the biggest creative blockers is time. If you're waiting for things, if you can't see something, if you're trying to imagine something, but if the tools are getting easier so that you can quickly toss together what you're trying to convey to somebody else, and then to be able to take that as a starting point, and rather than ditch it, right? You can iterate on it, and you iterate on it in real time. So it's more like working with pen and paper or canvas, right? There is an immediate, what I'm doing is either adding to or taking away from what I'm trying to get across. And I think that's part of the creative process that I think real time is starting to make happen.
Yep.
And so I think it's about storytelling. I think it's about the creatives behind it. That's the things that I think are the coolest. I don't think it's necessarily these giant LED stages, which I'm going to check them out tomorrow. I'm
Yeah.
really stoked for that. I don't know if you know this, but your color bars for you.
I know. Don't worry about that.
All right.
I know. Yeah, don't worry about that. It's just it's fine. But it's interesting because I agree completely. I've been interested in virtual production for a huge amount of time. I've actually interested in that color fidelity. I truly believe that when we get to that real time, the beauty of real time is not necessarily the rendering part, it's the real time part that I love. It's the fact that you can interact with things and make a decision when your mouse button goes up, as opposed to keep making decisions until you find the right one. You keep going and going and going. It's still, like you said, like a pen to paper, right? Which I think is great. But I'm really interested in when we get to that final pixel, which part of me thinks like is not going to happen with a rasterized rendering solution. It's going to happen with ray tracing. And I'm really seeing like full ray tracing happening in real time. And that's something that I've been working on for a long time and saying, well, when I have that, then I have the best of both worlds. And that's going to be the best part of it. So that's really what I'm looking forward to. I mean, what are your thoughts about real-time ray tracing?
Yeah, that's really what got my attention on the tech side of things. Is I've been kind of waiting for it. It kind of felt like we were involved in this really revolutionary time in desktop rendering, right, and artistic tools and things like that. And it felt like that wasn't really happening for quite a long time. And I know things were happening, but it really just felt like there wasn't that excitement or anything. And it's the ray tracing on the GPU that got me going, what? We expected you guys to do this 5 years ago, but it's awesome you're finally getting there. Right. And being able to get access to it as just an individual, right? Not a, it's a gaming card. So they're hard to get, but they're going to get easier to get. They're already easier to get, and the prices are coming back down to reasonable because market pressures made the prices go up so crazy. But that means you've got access to like super fast ray tracing, right? And I just looking at this and messing with it, it's not always real time, but it doesn't need to be real time. If we used to talk about hours per frame or things like that, and now it's like, oh, it's going to take 30 seconds a frame. Oh, that's too slow. You're kidding me, right? Like a lot of the real time guys, I'll listen to interviews with like the guys from Epic, and they're like, oh yeah, it's not really feasible, and it's like, are you kidding me? That's totally feasible,
right?
It's like, give it to me, Right. But it's like being able to like that quickly look at how the light moves across a surface and how how like soft shadows are beginning to work and how these things are starting to come together. I think is just that there's raster cheats for that, but there's always just nice to get that ground truth that a ray trace will give you,
Yeah.
For all that stuff, for a
I remember
really.
Yeah, I remember what Eric Nash was telling me. He was a VFX supervisor I worked with on iRobot, and he came from the background of miniature DP, so he never actually worked in CG, but he was a great supervisor. But he's like, I want to know how you do lighting, like, because that was his background, right? He's a DP, and it's like how you do lighting, and this is back in in RenderMan before ray tracing, so we had like a crap load of lights just to imitate the reality of the situation, which now would just be done with an HDR, right? So I would do that, and I would show him. He's like, this is crazy, and it's like, okay, so we do that. And then I move this light, and then I hit render, and I wait, and I wait, and I wait, and then I look at that and see what kind of adjustment, and then I'll start move a couple of lights and hit render and wait. And when he says the best analogy I would have of how this would translate to me being a lighter on set would be for me to look at the scene, turn all the lights off, move them around, wait half an hour, turn them on, see what I got, say that's not going to work, turn them all off again, and then guess where I have to put it. And wait. I was like, this is the most inefficient thing possible. So yes, I think moving and seeing the actions and reactions in real time to what you're deciding is the key to success in this area, right?
Yeah. I think that really that puts it very well.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's great. I mean, I've been focused on real time ray tracing for a long time, and I've sort of, first I did a show with. Did you know Kevin Margot at Blur? He was a Blur.
I don't think so. Man.
Okay, so I worked with Kevin Margot, and he was doing a short called Construct, and we referred. This was in 2013, 14. We started experimenting with adding V-Ray to Motion Builder so that we could do real-time ray tracing. And that's just when we had these GPU renderers. And it was the first time I was like, oh my God, it can start to look, I mean, it was grainy as hell because those GPUs were not as fast as they are now. But it's amazing how far we got. And it's just kind of nice like to sort of see that process. And now I'm working with Unreal and seeing how can I get V-Ray. Like there's V-Ray for Unreal, but I want to get Vantage in there, which is another real-time ray tracer we're working on, and sort of really seeing the fidelity of it is. And it just, to me, it's bringing back filmmaking tools to the filmmaker, when they actually get to see what they're doing. They don't just hand off the data to someone and say, see you in 6 months. Hopefully it looks like what I imagined in my head.
Yeah.
Yeah,
exactly. And I like what these tools have done to the production pipeline in a lot of cases where it isn't being handed off. It's kind of being the look of the shot and the visual effects themselves are being developed alongside the rest of the story and production. They're all being done at the same time because now we're able to bring the effects team in sooner.
Right.
And then they can basically just start out as previs and iterate through. And that means productions get done faster,
Right. And decisions get made sooner too, right?
Yeah.
I mean, how are you noticing the communication now, compared to like you were, you said in the early 2000s to now, like your communication with the creatives on set, is it different as you're able to make choices faster, or how do you feel that communication is going?
Well, in this production, the stuff I haven't seen any real change there. That's kind of the same.
Okay.
Where they make decisions on this, they're just to support them and advise, as much as possible. I still, generally, I just try to stay out. I try to stay out of the way. I don't want to disrupt their process. So I lurk and listen.
Mm-hmm.
And if I need to ask a question or get something communicated to another department or to stop them from doing something that might be a bigger problem down the road,
right?
Then I'll get involved. But it's on set working. It's the same way it used to be. There's not much of a change there. Because that's their spot. That's where they're working and they're doing their thing, and you got to let that happen.
But do they see what you're doing sooner, as opposed to before we would just go out with a bunch of chrome balls and they didn't really know what the hell we're doing, but they get to see your previs right there and interact with you a little bit more sooner.
Yeah. It gives them a much better idea of what they're doing.
Right.
Because it is difficult to imagine, there's a 15-foot creature right here, right? Well, a lot of people they don't know exactly what 15 feet is, right? So it sounds kind of obvious, but most people would get it wrong when they're thinking about, oh, well, your outline's going to be like this, and you go, no, he's going to fill this room, right?
Right.
And so there's not going to be any room to move. This is a giant like creature inside here. So they can then look at that and go, oh, yeah, he's a lot bigger than I thought he was going to be, that sort of thing.
Nice.
And so we were seeing a lot of that where they're like, oh, okay. So we have to make sure that the actors stay clear of, like it would be a lot more. There would have been a lot more sort of impingement in the past, and a lot more sort of it would be a struggle between the effects supervisor and the director or DP, because they're seeing something different in their head. But if you can actually kind of show them and go, look, this is what we're looking at, and as quickly as you can do that, and as clearly as you can do that, all the better, So that's I definitely did see a change with that, and that was something that early on was sort of a leap that everybody had to make, and having the tools available to sort of get them to see it helped. And then once everybody sort of had that headspace, then we didn't even need to use it anymore. Everybody was on board and had a very good idea of what we were looking at and trying to, the space we were trying to fill, things like that.
Right. I mean, so it sounds like you're really enjoying it, though, which is kind of awesome to get back into doing on-set stuff.
Yeah, it's I've missed the work very sorely. The brewery's been busy. My intention was always to get back into this, and it kept getting pushed off, and man, even 5-6 months in, every day, getting on set and just that energy, seeing everybody, I couldn't get the grin off my face. Before we started rolling on the first take of the day, my heart would just start pounding. I just would get so excited. I don't know why. It's so weird. By the end of the day, my attitude might have changed 180 degrees, but every day it's a different set of problems. And I just love working with and helping people deliver that vision there and that story they're trying to tell. I don't know why. It's just something that just tickles me.
Can you tell us a little bit about the projects you worked on? I know it's probably a little early, but maybe there's a little bit something you can tell us about some of the things you were.
Yeah, I expect that it'll probably come out probably sometime next year. I don't know the timeline out for sure.
Okay.
It's been written up in Variety magazine. It's an Amazon series called I'm a Virgo by Boots Riley, who did Sorry to Bother You.
Okay.
And so this is the first episodic that we shot. It's about a kid that grows up in Oakland, and we meet him when he's like 19, and he's 13 feet tall. So there's some challenges socially and societally that he's working through. Boots does a lot of. I love Boots' storytelling and his style, and his the kind of social justice messaging and stuff that is very prominent in his work. He used to be he was a hip hop star from. Oh man, he was in the Coup. He was in Street Sweeper Social Club, and then he was also with Galactic a bit. All amazing. I suggest checking him out. His stuff is great. Which is, it was actually such an honor to get to work with him on this, having actually seen him live at one point several years ago.
That's nice. That's awesome.
Yeah,
that's awesome. Well, listen, Scott, I really appreciate catching up with you on this stuff. I can't wait to see these shows. I can't wait to see that. I'm excited to see all the things you've done. I knew you got into brewing beer, and I was very excited about that, but I can imagine at this point you wanting to get back into it at sort of at a grassroots level. You're doing visual effects at a grassroots level now, which is kind of amazing and wonderful. And to be back into it is super cool. So Really excited. I can't wait. Actually, at some point, I want to share some of the stuff I'm doing in virtual production and see your thoughts and maybe get your feedback on some of that. That'd be really great. So,
Oh, I'd love to check it out.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So-
for sure.
so that'd be cool. All right. Well, thanks so much for doing this. I really appreciate it, Scott.
Cool. Well, thank you.